On today's special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken, plenty of green and hopefully plenty of gold.
You are Locked on Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to a SQUADCAST as we bring you Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild and the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making both shows your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On today's crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken, we dive into the Wednesday night late tilt. We got an 8:30 TNT start, pregame start. Puck drop will be closer to 9, but we'll take a look at the matchup. We'll take a look at how both teams are trending heading into this matchup as well. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked on Wild, joined by Erica L. Ayala of Locked on Kraken. And Erica, always love the chance to SQUADcast it up. Hope everything has been going good for you. Unfortunately, the Seattle Kraken not where they wanted to be at this point in the season. So let's dive into the deep and look right there. What have been some of the biggest factors that have led to the Kraken at this point in the season being a little further down in the standings than they would have hoped to be?
Yeah, well, first, it's always great to catch up with you, Seth. Love our SQUADcasts here. But for the Seattle Kraken, I think there's a few things that you have to look out here. There was, a decent enough change with people that we thought were going to be added to the roster that would help bolster the roster. But things were slow crawling for Chandler Stevenson. Now, flash forward, he is one of the players that went into the game against Chicago with, a multi-point streak. But it took a while. Not great defensively. And the team overall has never been a great defensive team. You can fight me on that. I know what the advanced analytics say about the Kraken are great at defense in these particular scenarios. And I'm like, okay, but when it's 5-on-5 and we're playing in the neutral zone, can we play defense or not? Like, anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine. I'm coming back. All right, I'm back. But I think that's been a little bit of it. There were some injuries. You have injuries every year. And we've heard even from Ron Francis, you don't want to make those excuses. When the Kraken in their first season trade away their first ever captain at the trade deadline, and then don't name another captain until this year. And then that captain is donezo, in the first month and a half. Like that's tough. That's going to have an impact. Jordan Eberle had a really unique, I guess, pelvic injury to the point where there wasn't really a clear path for recovery. So there was kind of, the way that Dan Bilesmeyer, head coach, had been describing it, almost like some experimentation, given that, again, just didn't really know what rehab was going to look like, what the timeline was going to look like. So we're glad to have him back on the ice. But even putting those things on the shelf to the side, some of the injuries, I think a few things stand out for me. One is that not a great season for Philip Grubauer. And goaltending is something I've been talking about since I took over, since we started the Locked on Kraken show, right? And this year, all of the questions that we had about Philip Grubauer, they began, to be answered maybe more so on the negative than he would have wanted, than his fans would have wanted. But it just wasn't working. It wasn't clicking. Notoriously, well, to Kraken fans at least, he was sent through waivers to Coachella Valley. This is a Vesna finalist that we sent through waivers. Are you kidding me? for a reset. We had players like Oliver Bjorkstrand had a reset. Andre Burakovsky had a reset. Shane Wright had a reset. And that is, Kraken speak or Bilesma speak for healthy scratches or demotions. Ty Cartier also sent back down to Coachella Valley. But overall, the most disappointing thing for me, Seth, has been this season is that the team just kind of called it in several times. It just, if you didn't know a hockey game was going on, it just felt like they were going through the motions, the bare minimum, completely absent-minded at times. And that's the hard pill to swallow for Kraken fans. You hear players like Jared McCann saying, hey, we know what we have to do. We know we have to be better. You hear Jordan Eberle, one of his first games back, saying, I mean, you see guys just not blowing assignments, lack of communication. I mean, that's inexcusable when you're making what these players make, to have multiple games. That it just was an inconsistent season from the mentality, right, that you need, that is required to be a professional athlete.
I know one of the young players coming into the season that the Kraken were hoping to get going and to get to be part of the future was Shane Wright. And I look at the box score. I see he's got 15 goals through 65 games so far this season. What do you think of Wright's progress throughout the course of this season? Is he getting to where he needs to be? Does he still have some steps that he needs to follow to kind of keep his development going the way it should be?
Yeah, it's a great question because I mentioned the resets. Shane Wright, his reset, other than Philip Grubauer, who got sent again to Coachella Valley, his was the longest. His was 3 consecutive healthy scratches. What we also heard, we learned the most about these resets during the time that Shane stepped away. And I think it was the right call by the coaching staff because what we heard was how Shane came into camp, how he played early on. There was a stretch of time where he wasn't meeting that expectation. And so what the team did, the organization did, is they had him watching games at CPA from the top and sitting, in a row with our general manager and our development director breaking down 20 minutes of Kraken hockey. And for Shane, I do think that was an impactful, useful reset, because there was a focus, right? It wasn't sending a message, so to speak, like in the kind of passive aggressive way that we kind of think about healthy scratches. I mean, that's what brought Capo Caco, right? to from New York to Seattle effectively. So for Shane, and to answer your question, I think that, maybe we would want him to have a little bit more, see him do a little bit more. But again, this is not a Kraken team that overall has been very effective offensively. So, putting his goals into context, I mean, he also is great on the power play. He revived the power play that was very stagnant. I mean, abysmal for a really long time. And it's been Shane Wright that's been able to be successful there. So I think that there's still a ways to go. Shane's entry into pro hockey, especially with the Kraken, has been a little bit of a start and stop. I don't see that as a bad thing. I think there's a lot of cachet that comes with his name and everything that happened at the draft and the death glare and all of that stuff. But I honestly think that Shane is taking it in stride. I don't get the sense that he is confused as to where he stands with the Kraken organization and Seattle, especially with the new coaching staff, which leans into professional development for all players, but especially young prospects. We see that they're taking time with Shane Wright. They're taking time with Beniers, who I think also has benefited from that focus, and even from some players that I'm sure we'll talk about down the road. So I'm okay with where Shane Wright is. With some of the recent roster changes, his role has changed once again. But Dan Bilesma said, he was asked, well, what do you make of, having to move Shane Wright to the fourth line? And without any hesitation or stutter, Dan Bilesma said, you're the only one calling it the fourth line. And I do think that where Shane is makes sense in the lineup, given what some of the other goals are for the Kraken. And we've seen that a few times. Players have maybe played a role a little bit different. Jared McCann stands out because the focus was to maybe refine and elevate a specific player, a specific line, and really focus on that part of the team's game. And I think that's where Shane is right now. But he's been getting, again, power play minutes. I thought he was great. Oh, gosh. With Oliver Bjorkstrand and Ellie Tolvanen, that was my favorite combination of the entire season. Bjorkstrand no longer with us. Pour some soda out for him. But, I think Shane is going to be fine. I think he's on track. Again, it's that start and stop. But I don't think there's any confidence lost from him or the organization in where he stands for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things that I have learned about development is it's not a straight line.
No, exactly.
It is not something where you go pretty cleanly from A to B. Marco Rossi is a great example of that.
Yes.
First 19 games that he played at the NHL level did not go well. It was partially him. It was partially the way in which he was utilized in that time frame, but was told to go down to Iowa and work on a few things. And he has been a regular mainstay in the lineup ever since. So
there you go.
A lot of times it's just about kind of getting a taste and refining a few things and moving forward. So glad to hear that Shane Wright's making some steps, because I know that when that pick was made, there was a lot of reaction to it. And in those cases, I always like to see the player get the last laugh.
Yeah, so. Indeed.
Well, let's flip. I'll let you ask some Minnesota Wild related questions. I can imagine that one of them will relate to what is this team right now, because it's been a journey here for the last couple of months. So we'll talk about all that. Plus, we'll talk a little bit about both general managers, I'm sure, before the show is done here today, because kind of feels like both are in similar spots with their rosters. So we'll talk about that as well. All coming up as we continue today's special crossover edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken after this. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like watching basketball live. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood, one of my favorite sounds of all time, and maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside. If you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets even easier. Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands of tickets. My favorite feature of Game Time is that they show you your view from your seat. I've seen some of those horror stories on social media where somebody buys a ticket and they're sitting directly behind a pillar in the very top of the stadium seats, and you see them looking out to the side like, oh yeah, I've got a great view of this game. You don't get that with Game Time. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time.
Today's episode of Locked on Minnesota Wild and Locked on Seattle Kraken also brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Did I really just spend all this money on tickets to see the Knicks just to see Tracy Morgan throw up on the sideline? I mean, who knows? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. I am a small business owner and I use Monarch Money. And what I love is the dashboard. It is super intuitive, seamless. I've used other things before to, again, track spending, but the cash flow report being front and center is huge for a business owner. And it's just one of the things that I absolutely love about Monarch Money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year.
Welcome back to today's special SQUADCAST edition of Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken, part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Once again, your team each and every day. Seth Toupal and Erica L. Ayala hanging out here. And Erica, let's get to some Minnesota Wild questions here. I will turn it over to you, and anything that you have Minnesota Wild related, I'm an open book.
All right. I love it. I feel like there's probably a few buckets here. One is injuries. Another is likely related to injuries, and, who's picking up the pieces, maybe a little bit too much. I can definitely identify one player, Joey Daccord, who is doing that for Seattle. And then, also just thinking about what moves that happened at the trade deadline. What does that indicate for what the future is for Minnesota? So first, let's talk about the injuries. I mean, I mentioned the pelvic surgery that our captain had to have, missed him for several months, but there were some big names that have been missing from the Minnesota Wild. So what has that been like? And are there any updates?
Well, I'm glad you started with this, because Kraken fans are not going to believe the timeline that I'm going to lay out, because this goes all the way back to December after Christmas, the first game of the post-Christmas schedule for the Minnesota Wild. We were told that Kirill Kaprizov was going to be held out of the lineup because he's a little banged up.
Yeah.
And I remember not thinking anything of it, although being like, don't like that. Don't like
You're
that
right.
after a 4-day Christmas break. And one game turned into 2, turned into 3, turned into 4. He ended up missing 12 games
Brutal.
by just being banged up, and then came back for 3. Didn't look right. So you're thinking in your head, you're like, okay, this is not great. And then after his last game against Chicago, in which he did record an assist, it was announced that he was going to be having surgery and was going to be week to week. The estimated timetable was 4 to 6 weeks. That was on January 26th against the Chicago Blackhawks. So we were told 4 to 6 weeks. One of the things, Erica, that has frustrated me quite a bit is, and this is not just a Minnesota Wild problem, but it seems like it's a lot of the Minnesota Wild. We never know what the injury is. We never know the designation of the injury other than strictly upper or lower body.
Yeah.
We didn't even get an update that he had surgery.
Oh my goodness.
Like reporters were having to find out secondhand that the surgery actually took place.
Oh, geez.
And so fast forward to after the Four Nations face-off, because that was right at about the 4-week mark, was, okay, he's going to miss a few games after the Four Nations face-off, but then should be back right about the trade deadline.
Yeah.
Bill Guerin went on local radio and said he's going to be out longer than we anticipated. And at that point, you're like, what now?
Right.
Fast forward to today, and the language remains mostly the same, is that there is an expectation that Kirill Kaprizov will be able to return by the end of the regular season.
Ugh.
But Bill Guerin says, I don't have a timetable. My gripe is that it's not like you have months of the season remaining. You have 14 games left.
Right. Yeah, right.
And you have to allow for some time for a guy to get himself back up and ramped up. So even if he gets ramped up by the end of the month of March, you've got 6 or 7 games left in the season, and it's going to take a couple of weeks after skating resumes to get ready to even be in game shape.
Jeez.
And by that point, you're pretty much at the postseason at this point.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Right.
So the secrecy and the cloud of just not knowing is equal parts very concerning and equal parts very frustrating.
Yeah.
And that's one
Yeah.
player.
Right.
Joel Eriksson Ek has been out of the lineup as well, through undercurrent channels. It sounds like it's a broken bone that he suffered after blocking a shot right after the Four Nations faceoff. Week to week, lower body injury is what we were told. He has not resumed skating either. And I said right after the drop, once that was announced, if his timetable is 4 to 6 weeks, 4 weeks gives 3 games left in the season.
Right.
And that's on the low end of the timetable. So
right.
Concerns about him as well. Now, it sounds like Jonas Brodin is getting close. He has resumed skating and he has started to get incorporated back into practice. But those are too important of players. 2 players that are too important, TWOTOO, 2 players that are too important to just kind of be like, we don't really know. And so part of my brain is like, are they just not coming back at all? And we're just kind of stretching this out. It has been a mess, and understandably so. The team's performance has suffered without them in the lineup. You're missing your number 1 net front, number 1 center, number 1 power play, number 1 penalty kill center in Joel Eriksson Ek. He does all of that.
Yeah.
And you're missing your best player on offense. Today's episode of Locked on Wild and Locked on Kraken is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more. Experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. It connects you with the right talent. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can connect you with a freelance expert who delivered incredible results. It's like job-free agency, and you can set the amount of time that you're looking for a particular person with a particular set of skills, and just go get them. Upwork makes it incredibly easy to do. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So
that's brutal. And
Yeah.
like the not knowing, I think is also the tough part. I will say, like, Kraken fans will know that when Dan Bilesma says maintenancing, that probably means that there's a little something to it. He's maintenancing, not taking a maintenance day, but he's maintenancing, which I think is hilarious. But also that's his tell, or like, all right, this guy's dealing with some stuff. We've had some players, Yanni Gord, also pour some soda out for him, no longer with the Kraken. He was retroactive. Vince Dunn, we didn't get a clear indication of what was going on with him early on in the season. So definitely get it to some extent, but not to the degree that you're talking about, which is wild. Those are like mind games, it feels like. Hopefully go ahead.
I'm just sitting here screaming into a microphone. Can we get somebody that can read a medical record?
Right?
Come on.
HIPAA laws be damned. But hopefully there was at least transparency when it came to internally with the organization, because if not, then that's a whole nother mess.
Yeah.
But I mentioned McCann in passing in the first segment because I do feel that he kind of got lost in the sauce, is what I say a lot. He was, because he's such, for the Seattle Kraken. I will put that caveat out there. A prolific scorer. He's been our best scorer season after season. And, he still was finding a way to be there. He's not at the moment, but despite the fact that he was hopping around lines, not really being put in situations where he could be a goal scorer. And so my question to you then is, after outlining those injuries and kind of the timeline being, beyond fuzzy, non-existent,
Yeah.
are there players that you feel have been a little worse for the wear, either physically or with their productivity because of the injuries?
Well, that is the billion-dollar question for this team is, okay, so Kirill Kaprizov is going to be missing a bunch of time.
Yeah.
You can't replace him. You can't replace him by simply putting somebody in that spot on the roster.
Right.
Like you're going to need a bunch of different players to each chip in and help out.
Right.
Whether it be, hey, I'll chip in and be kind of the go-to guy in the power play, or I'll help with some of the 5-on-5. And the team is just, it's almost as if they still are just waiting for him to come back out onto the ice and to step into that lead role. Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi have been, the two most prolific scorers for this team other than Kirill Kaprizov. Kaprizov hasn't played since the end of March, and he still leads the team in goals scored. So that's been a little bit of a problem, is that, and I don't know if it's those two just being under too much pressure to try to do it themselves, but this team also has a lot of players that just aren't offensive drivers. Like they have a lot of guys that profile as more like two-way players. They can chip in some goals periodically, but their biggest contributions is on the defensive side. Right. So you look at those guys and you're like, well, yeah, they need to be doing more, but they're not really that type of player anyway. Yeah. So that has been one of the big problems for this team, is just that they don't have a ton of bona fide top 6 talent on this roster yet. So you take away
familiar.
You take away your top player, and obviously it's not going to look the way that you want it to. Right. But still, like we talked about this before we hit record, and you talked about it a little bit with the Kraken, is like the effort stuff and the we're going to outwork you. It may not be enough, but we're still going to outwork you. Like that kind of stuff just feels like it should be non-negotiable. And there have been some stretches for this team in which you look at the game and you're like, boy, that just was not anywhere close to where it needs to be. So that kind of stuff gets frustrating too, because it's like, I understand you're going to struggle to score, but you should never have those stretches of games where it looks like you don't even want to.
Right, exactly. And, you can say what you want for the Kraken about, Dave Haxtell. But, we never had multiple games in a row where the team just wasn't showing up in the way that I've seen this season. And that's not to implicate Dan Bylsma, because I do like his coaching style. And I do like what's happening there. But, you've got two guys on a 7-7, as I like to say, Chandler Stevenson, Brandon Montour. You lose your captain. And I'm not in the locker room, right? I'm not a member of the Seattle Kraken. And, I've been around sports, been an athlete long enough to know that if there's enough ego, and what is enough, like it doesn't have to be massive, but if there's enough ego sometimes that is just a little off, it can throw team dynamics off. And when you have a new coaching staff, you have young players that you're trying to incorporate and fold in, and that coaching staff is focused on them, a la your question regarding Shane Wright, Matty Beniers, etc. Do you have guys that need a little bit more of that attention than they're getting because it's just not their time? They're expected to show up and do their job, but maybe, to your point about having elite level talent, or, elite top 6 talent, the Seattle Kraken are not there yet. And so every guy's got to be responsible first and foremost for himself. Now, I think that should always be the case. We also know as human beings, that's not always the case. Yep. And that's real, right? We can acknowledge and admit that. I've never worked a job though where I'm getting paid millions of dollars to play a game. So for me, it's a little tough to see that that's still an issue.
Yeah. Well, and I think hockey is the one sport where it is the most obvious if it's not up to par. Like you look at some of the other sports, football, baseball, you can get by without your best stuff and still be effective. I think in the NBA that shows as well, but it just feels like in hockey, if somebody's coasting out there on the ice, you see it immediately and you're like, that guy is not doing whatever his contribution is to the lineup.
Right.
And so then when the losses start to pile up, you go back to that stuff and you're like, well, think about this previous game where guy was dragging the sled around the ice. It's like, we can't have that.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think as we get ready to, preview this matchup, I think also it's worth even stepping outside of just what's going to happen on the ice, because it sounds like both of these teams, there's a little bit of, there's a realignment that is necessary between the roster, the coaching staff, and the front office to figure out, what the future is truly going to look like. And if the players that you want to keep are going to get the help that they obviously need. Factoring in that, yes, hockey is a physical sport and you're going to have to deal with injury. So I think we should talk about that coming up on this SQUADCAST, Seth.
I love that. We'll dive in to that and more as we finish today's SQUADCAST episode right after this.